Hey there, welcome back once more. So now we're on the kingdom of fungi. So the kingdom of fungi is a kingdom that you're used to because you do see fungi quite often, probably mostly in the form of mushrooms. But mushrooms are certainly not the only type of fungus, and you might be surprised to learn that mushrooms are just sort of the tip of the iceberg, so to speak, and we'll get to that in a moment. So here you can see a bunch of different type of fungi that you might encounter um, in your daily life. Maybe if you're walking out in the woods or something, you'd see these different type of fungi. Okay, so fungal characteristics. The reason that they're grouped together into the same kingdom is because they're eukaryotic, meaning their cells have a nucleus. Most fungi are multicellular. Fungi have cell walls, however their cell walls are made up of a different material than the cell walls of plants. The cell walls of fungi are made up of a material called chitin, whereas the cell walls of plants are made up of a material called cellulose. So they both have cell walls, just made of a different type of stuff. People used to think that fungi were plants, and that's before people were able to take a closer look with a microscope. Now, the reason that fungi are not plants is because fungi aren't producers. Plants have that all in common. All plants are producers. Fungi are not. Fungi are mostly decomposers. Okay, they're mostly decomposers, living on their food source and drawing nutrients directly from it. So scientists have grouped all fungi into 4 categories. Now, we're not going to pay too much attention to these categories. I'm more interested in you guys knowing the overall characteristics of fungi and why they're grouped into that kingdom. But it is a good idea to know that there are different subgroups within the kingdom itself. The one that you're probably most familiar with are the club fungi, which form these nice mushrooms, or the sac fungi. Look kind of similar. You might be familiar with zygote fungi if you're not very good at cleaning out your refrigerator, because zygote fungi is usually what makes food spoil. In addition to that, the imperfect fungi does as well. Okay, so we'll keep going here. If we look at the structure of a fungus, we see that a fungus, the mushroom part at least, the reproductive structure that appears above ground, it's made up of a bunch of filaments that are attached and work together, and those filaments are called hyphae. So hyphae are the filaments that make up the structure of a fungus. Now, below ground we have hyphae as well, but the hyphae below ground make up what's known as the mycelium, and the mycelium is really the massive, bulky part of a fungus. So what you're seeing at the surface is just the reproductive part. So if you see a mushroom sticking out of the ground, that fungi is just using that mushroom for reproduction. Below the surface, there'd be a very large structure known as the mycelium. And actually, I read somewhere that the largest organism ever discovered was a fungus, and it was several miles in diameter, because the mycelium was just so big that it just covered such a broad area underneath the ground. So the mycelium is the majority of the fungus, where the tip of the iceberg, I said earlier, is just the reproductive part that sticks out. Okay, whoops. And as far as reproduction goes, we can see here this fungus here. It's called a puffball, I believe, because when it opens up, it puffs out all this powder, and this powder is actually little tiny spores. So instead of using seeds, like plants would use seeds to disperse their offspring, so to speak, fungi don't use seeds, but they use spores. Spores get up in the air, they're carried by wind or by animals, and they land somewhere else, and a new fungi or a new fungus can form. Most fungi will reproduce asexually, so they're making just exact copies of themselves. However, sometimes through a very complicated reproductive process, 2 fungi can reproduce to make sexual offspring, which would have the combination of both parents' genes. Okay, and fungi are extremely important. We might not think of them as being important, but they're really important because they're nature's recyclers. We can see here this log is being broken down by this fungus. And this mouse, after 10 days, is being broken down by these fungi. And here's a rotten log. Now you might be thinking, well, what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is that here on Earth, we're limited into how much nutrients there are in the Earth. So plants need constant nutrition in order to grow. So not only do they need water and sunlight, but they need nutrients from the soil. When a plant is growing, it traps those nutrients inside of it. Or when an animal is alive, it has nutrients trapped inside of it. But when those living things die, whether it be a plant or an animal or anything else, the only way that those nutrients get put back into the soil is through decomposition of fungi and possibly bacteria as well. So if it wasn't for fungi decomposing and breaking down dead stuff, the nutrients would be taken out of the soil and they'd stay out of the soil and never go back in. So they wouldn't be recycling the nutrients back into the soil. So what does that mean? It means eventually the soils would be depleted of nutrients and no more new life could grow. And the earth would eventually become barren. But fortunately that's not the case, because things that die are constantly being recycled and the nutrients are being put back into the soil. Life can continue to take place. So that's really the importance of fungi. Something very similar to a fungus is called a lichen, or you might hear it pronounced as a lichen. I'm not really sure if there is a proper pronunciation. Maybe it just has to do with where you're from and if you have an accent or not. But lichen or lichens, they are what's known as a mutualistic symbiotic relationship between algae and a fungus. So a lichen is not really either an algae or a fungus. It's kind of the two that live together and they both benefit from each other's presence. So on the outside, what you have is the fungus, which sort of houses and protects what's on the inside, which is an algae. So it's a very complex relationship between the two. But lichen are extremely important because you'll find them growing in places where nothing else grows. We see these old headstones here at a cemetery. They're covered with these lichens. Lichens can actually live on rock, and they break down rock. And that's going to be really important. We're going to learn in a few weeks why that's so important. So lichens are a combination of an algae and a fungi, and they can pretty much live anywhere. Alright, so that's all I got. You guys will be learning more about fungi in class in the coming days. Take care. Please let it be known that all the images used within this presentation were listed on Creative Commons as free use to be used for educational purposes. Thank you.